Good evening and welcome to another Pharaoh stream with myself, Pharaoh, and we're here to do another episode of Interwar Art at the Royal Academy. We've only got 2 more to go. This is the notorious 1939. I had to send off to Australia to order the book for this. I've only just managed to get the time together to pull together the analysis and some of the favourite picks from it because of the exhibition number 2 that went on recently. Just want to say it was a big success. Thank you everyone for taking the time and effort to come out and see it. Who did that? Thank you for boosting it online and sharing it with other people and sharing your excitement. And if you're involved in any way, I just want to say a special thank you very much for all of your hard work on that. But I've got a 1 hour slot now during lunch to talk about this penultimate year. If you recall, we're going to take a look through the kind of the best pictures in the Royal Academy during the interwar period. Now, I know that the war has technically started at this point. However, in my opinion, there is a bit of a delay between when we start and when it between when the war starts and when work finishes, because obviously certain artworks take a year, 2 years to complete. So I've sort of shifted it. I think we started at 1920 anyway, so it's going to be a full 2-decade period that we've gone through during this. So let's just dive into it. Again, I think we had that kind of conservative turn at the RA where Munnings kind of lay down his tent. Wyndham Lewis gets rejected, but but I think that hasn't really come into effect till in a couple of years' time. Basically, from what I see, when you hit the 40s, the conservative turn doesn't hit. But Munnings still had a great victory with rejecting Wyndham. But there still are some kind of powerful works and some kind of interesting figures around during that time. Now, annoyingly, I've had my order list slightly messed up, so it's going to be slightly out of whack. But we've got this lovely piece here from Meredith Frampton called Trial and Error. Again, this is very much in the Frampton wheelhouse. You've got this kind of interwar sculptural realism, smooth surfaces, beautifully rendered. I mean, this piece for me is Meredith. Again, he's at the height of his powers. The level of his portraiture definitely steps up, and he's rendering things in a very interesting way, which is simultaneously very real, but also has this kind of uncanny quality to it. Giving some strange optical illusions. For example, I wanted to think about the position of the stool which is sitting on the table. Now you can see from the leg that is closest to us, that should be in the middle of the table, but does it quite fit on the rest of the space? I feel like he's compressed the back leg. Also, the way that if you see the supports on the stool, we can only see the back two. I guess maybe it's it's funny. You can see this like I don't know if you can see my little cursor here. You can see the back support here, but what's this going on down here, the kind of front support? Is this just the way that the picture was taken, or is this him kind of messing around with the perspective again? And I think it's him tweaking things around. The same thing with the perspective on this flower pot versus this one across here versus the teacup. It's a bit more top down. And again, I think this is intentional. He's also filled up these pieces with very strange bits, and I feel like Meredith is really exploring with a strange form of Dura-est symbolism here. What can we see on here? Well, we've got a mannequin's head. That's kind of interesting. A fruit on top of an urn, which is on top of some kind of like niche here. We've got a sculptural drawing in the center, and again, that in itself is such a beautiful render, but then he's put it into perspective to give that kind of trick of the eye style piece. What is the meaning behind it? Well, it's hard to tell. In my opinion, this is about like craft and creating things. So, for example, I was thinking about like these look like schematic designs. This is like an engineer's book at the bottom, or the mannequin and the ribbon are tied to the craft and the creation of cloth at the same time. This is you can see the brown paper here. This is actually the divider for ribbon. I've bought several old bits of vintage ribbon, and it comes a bit like this in this big spool, and then the brown paper sort of keeps that kind of beautiful silk ribbon separate. You've also got drawing here as a craft, both the actual piece itself, but something like the pear on top of the urn is like is sort of like a still life, and the still life is where like the where you kind of try out your skills. It's kind of like one of the early things that artists will practice on. You can see you've got the kind of shear scissors here tied again into the fashion and clothes making. So I think you can take this piece as like a beautifully rendered still life, but I think there's an interesting piece here where there's an interesting thought and symbolism to it about what makes up craft and what makes up items as well. Okay, on to this next piece from David Jagger. Jagger kind of does, I would say, these like interwar beauties, very much influenced by kind of the Americans and American style and Hollywood coming through. And you've got this Mrs. R.B. Foster. Obviously, the American invasion has very much happened, both in terms of kind of capital and cultural invasion. And you can see this in the dresses as well. This is, this could be straight off a Fred Astaire film or something like that. But in terms of the style, I think of something like John Gunn, where again you've got these beautiful interwar beauties, but in the kind of the other Jagger, not the other Jaggers, in the Sargent style of these kind of long and tall portraits. In terms of the actual piece itself, I think it's obviously beautifully rendered with a bit more realism than most. There's no idealizing of the background across here. And interesting hand position as well. One leg contrapposto looking away. It's very kind of demure but knowing at the same time. Okay, we've got this lovely piece from Reed Dick here. This is kind of like really towards the end of his life. And this is another Madonna and Child. It's something that he keeps coming back to time and time again. I really love the Madonna in this. I think she's really noble and graceful. The Child, the actual rendering is good, but I don't like the pose so much. So I think if you focus on the main Madonna figure, I think it's a really beautiful piece done in stone here. And there's, having a child lifted up here sort of reminds me of St. Christopher motifs, something like that. But this is very much what it's like to be a parent. And I think Reed Dick by this time had several children and knew the difficulties and intricacies of having children. And I think it's a very beautifully rendered female here. Okay, on to another Reed Dick piece, and this is it's called Herald, figure for the Reuters new building in Fleet Street. And again, I think one thing that Reed Dick has as a sculptor that many don't have is his integration with the building. And again, I think this is one of the reasons why I love this period so much. There's a real attempt to reconcile sculpture with architecture. Once again, this piece is specifically created for a space as well. And again, I love that idea. I think today you'll barely get any sculpture attached to a building. And when it does happen, it is very much bolted on to the building itself or just kind of placed on the ground. It's always a secondary thought, oh, we need to fill out this space. Let's tick the sculptural box. But the interwar architects were really thinking about, this is a very Ruskinian, like a post-Ruskinian idea, really. How can we integrate great sculptural works into spaces and how to create things for space? So the Herald itself, I think, is a relatively standard Reed Dick piece. Not necessarily my favorite, but I think it really works in the space. The building is still today. around here today. This is, but I should have maybe had a zoomed out picture, but it's in this kind of like large roundel hollow above the doorway. And so, again, the sculpture has been created for that circular space because the figure itself, yes, he's sitting on a circle. That's number one. But also in terms of his the space that the figure is occupying in space, it's relatively circular. He's pulled up the wing across here, put the arm slightly higher up to give that form, not like the natural human shape is like a rectangle standing up. And so how do we create the circle? We sit him down, stretch the arms out, etc. I've got to say that the statue looks a bit gross from the amount of the pigeon assaults that have gone on across here. I'm planning on visiting this in person in a couple of weeks' time to see if I can get some better imagery of it. I think it particularly looks lovely in bronze as well, and has that obviously the herald and Reuters at the same time aligns very well. So I think if you were to take it as a piece of sculpture in by itself, I think it would be one of his lesser works. But I think in the context of the space and the building, it becomes elevated, and I think that's an interesting and forgotten concept at the same time. Let's go to, we've got some more sculpture here from Garb, and Garb's just sort of chipped away, really, hasn't he? Normally working with natural stone, I think he's an interesting figure because the natural stone craze that went on is very much more on the kind of extreme modernists, more Epstein, etc. Really focus on that, which Garb has sort of followed, but being in the RA, his figures are always tied more to realism more. This is a kind of a rare bronze for him, really. And I think it's lovely because it's kind of like the interwar panther, which again is a classic motif in America, for example, but at rest. Again, if you look up even Sergeant Jagger, for example, it was the memorial to Indian soldiers in Egypt, something like that. Where we've got this kind of panther climbing up the side. Exceptionally powerful and virile figure. And again, if you search for kind of like American Deco panther, you'll see these kind of prancing figures. Maybe Bugatti is another example. The other Bugatti is a good example of that, I think. While this is okay, we've got the kind of the sleekness and the beauty of the panther here, but at the same time, we've got the panther at repose. Sorry, just hold on a second. Great, I think I should be back now. Sorry about that. The panther itself, so it's kind of like a dynamic subject, taken with this kind of calmness and intensity. And I love the face. That there is a real kind of softness, reflection, something about power contained here as well. And Garb for me is just a real totally forgotten figure that produces some really totally brilliant works. Here's one of his heads here, done in marble again. This is natural stone, classic Garb. There's something almost a bit Art Nouveau. I always think about his heads and the style that he does it, like Jean Delville. What he does to the figure in the painting world, Garb does in the sculptural. And I think this is a study for a larger piece that I've seen that gets made a couple of years down the line. But very nice piece. Love the hair. And again, very unique and original style that's not really talked about. Gill has sent across a few pieces of work to the RA in the last 4 years or so. And I think, again, it's interesting to see the divide between the painting side versus the sculptural. The sculptural guys are much more open. They're sort of almost operating in their own regard, I think, at this point. And because of that, Gill feels more comfortable working with these guys. This is a beautiful Memento Mori by Gill. I mean, even before the scandal around Gill, I feel like his reputation was way higher than deserved. But I still think this is a lovely piece. His best stuff is actually, I think, this kind of quasi relief style. And again, it's a reminder about us dying. I think there is an accompanying piece that I've seen with a male in a similar pose. But there's some really nice touches to it. For example, the legs lifted up. That's the advantage of sculpting relief. We can mess around with the pose and give it that kind of lightness of foot, like she's ascending to heaven or descending down at the same time. But then he's added a bit of shadow and shade in the hands and the head. So again, relief is all about light and dark. Where you emphasizing that shadow and where you emphasizing the lighter parts, and you're doing that by sort of bringing the relief out more, and you can see the hand has got that depth to it to create that kind of darkness around the hand. That not only acts as a kind of a triangular point of reference, this is a very triangular piece. You can see the shoulders versus the feet to a point, and the hands and the head. So there's a structural element to it, but also it's going to attract our eyes to the text and the Latin and the bringing the pathos that comes with that. We've got this interesting little piece from Wheeler here, and it's I think it's just called A Bronze Angel. And I mean, I don't know how I quite felt about it. I think it's definitely not Wheeler's stronger pieces. He's experimenting with some interesting stuff here. So, for example, there is something definitely like quite Attic about it, or ancient. Maybe something like some of the early Athena Greek statues you might see. It's got this strong perpendicularity to it, arms tucked in, wings tied close to the body. The wings are really interesting as well. Just again, he's sort of he's experimenting a little bit with how to show those forms and to regulate them in interesting and novel ways. And but I think for me, it doesn't, like, again, compare this to the Bank of England spirit we saw a couple of years ago. This is, in my opinion, substantially inferior, but kind of like an experimental piece. I'd love to see it in the actual bronze, and I think that would definitely make it look a little bit better. But still worthwhile discussing. Okay, this piece is by Dodd Proctor, The Orchard. I mean, I have to think that it's there is some dialogue going on here between this piece and I've forgotten his name now. I'm just trying to look it up live. Give me a second. Yeah, Fleetwood Walker. Fleetwood Walker's done a number of these kind of like nudes in the forest, but Dodd has taken this very light impressionistic tone to it. This comes straight out of like the French impressionist period, but done some interesting things with the poses, and has really managed to capture a very beautiful moment. I still think Dodd has a very strong reputation nowadays. I think compared to some of the other guys we've seen, I think she should be more humbled a little bit. But it's moments like this, which is, I mean, this is like one of her best pieces of work. I think she just does the female form so well. It's nude, but it's almost totally stripped of eroticism, in my opinion. It's you can kind of feel the heat of the summer, the birds tweeting. It's about capturing that, like a moment of freedom, a moment of rest, a moment of beauty, but not a kind of a carnal beauty, but the delicacy of a fruit that has flowered on a tree. And I think, you can see just, I love how Dodd's just put in a couple of branches across here, put in just one or two pieces of fruit. So again, it's about like the joys of summer and harvest, etc. Maybe some allusions to Eve in the garden as well, something like that. But I think this is, the rendering on this is fantastic. Definitely one of the best pieces that she's done. Dodd also does very good kids' portraits, and I think the kids is so difficult to get right. I think I've never seen a good children's portrait done by the Victorians. I think this is one of their big weaknesses, just too sentimental. And actually, I think Dodd here is probably done like one of the top 10 kids paintings of all times here with Betty. And I have a little girl, maybe of a similar age. My one's 5 turning 6 right now. Very beautiful, very precocious, and very stubborn. And I think we see some of that in Betty here as well, where she's kind of sitting. It almost looks like on like a bird walnut background, in my opinion, but maybe it's just like a random piece of background or some incidental. And she's kind of sort of sitting there with her arms folded, looking off in the distance. Maybe she's sulking. Maybe she hasn't got her way and she's sitting down. Maybe she has to do something else and she's desperately looking out the window, longing to play. But Dodd here has really captured the trickiness of children and their longing to do something else and their immaturity and their feelings so beautifully with no sentimentality at all. I think so. This is why I think it's really a great picture from Dodd here. So lovely. Okay, we've got a piece here by Herbert Budd, In Praise of Summer. I mean, maybe one of the reasons why stuff starts to change is because this kind of the classical revival has been going for 20 years now. It feels tired, and I think this is a good painting still. But what is this? What is being said here that's new compared to, someone like De Glem, I think, has done it better, or some of the other Parises that we've seen, but still a nice piece. I mean, I mainly included it because it's got a cute little squirrel on the shoulder of this figure here. Still rather nice. You know what? Maybe if this is it could be a watercolor, I wonder, and then I would say that it's worthy of more respect. But I think a good, but ultimately not that interesting painting. Now, Charles Gear continues to do some of his lovely landscapes. Again, I think really underrated figure. You have to see the color though of these, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to find it for this, but it's all about these kind of deep, maybe like Silurian blues, maybe not so deep actually, and luscious greens. There's a lightness to it. It's about the sky and those moments where the kind of the light just bounces off the sea and the fields and creates this real beautiful visage that's very, very special. Speaking of kind of female nudes like that Bud piece that we saw, we've got Russell Flint and his Models for Goddesses. So we've seen him previously do a Paris piece, and this is almost kind of like a meta. Like, again, Fleetwood Walker is kind of going out of his great classical phase and into his more realist phase. He still places the female and the female nude at the center of his work, but rather than showing a classical piece, we've captured this moment with the models beforehand, and you can see the work that he's working on, or maybe it's a sketch on the top here where we've got Aphrodite, Athena, and Hera. You can see on the left-hand side on this painting, and presumably, we've got the three people all lined up, ready to kind of plug into that at the same time. But what are they doing? They're staring into a different portrait, another portrait, and so there's this kind of weird meta self-referential. This is a painting of a painting, and actually not even that. It's a painting of the process of painting happening, but a moment captured even outside of that. So this is like almost like classical painting trapped in a realist painting at the same time. I mean, just the rendering alone on this is fantastic. I particularly like the blonde here in the middle. Again, everything's so tantalizing. No breasts shown whatsoever. Everyone's kind of hiding their modesty, but you've got three great poses where Fleetwood Walker is able to kind of show his expertise of showing the female form, and but also the setup for this allows so much kind of showing off of technique and skill here. You can, showing the kind of the painting in perspective, the painting within a painting, and the painting within a painting also has a different feel and tone. It feels more like a flat tempera painting, something like that, like his very early style, while you've got this kind of full watercolor style. Although I think this is an oil, his full oil style with the figures at the front here. So really interesting, very meta piece. But again, we're kind of moving away now from Flint's classical mode. I enjoyed this little piece here from Francis Dodd. I don't think we've had much Dodd stuff beforehand. It was very reminiscent of Spencer Watson or a Strang painting. That's why I kind of threw it in here. This is Marcella. She's holding onto her dog. Reminds me a little bit of PJ Harvey, actually. This is very PJ Harvey coded, if you look her up. I think there's something interesting about it in terms of its setup. So we've had, I think there's only been 2 other portraits maybe with a dog or a pet inside it. But this feels like we're capturing someone in the middle of, they're about to go for a dog walk, and you can see here the bit of the wainscoting here, showing that there is no kind of setup and drapery behind it at all. There's an added element of realism to it. In terms of the actual kind of technique, I think it's very, very beautifully done. Some nice realist elements and kind of confrontational with the kind of view, but she's sort of looking off at the same time, so it's not quite attacking us. But still, I think a very lovely portrait here. Okay, we've got Harry Morley here. Again, Morley never really progressing, I think, beyond from some of his greater classical work here, and this is him back to his kind of realism pieces. Drury Lane and the Gaiety, so obviously this is down London town and the Gaiety Theatre in the background. You can go and visit this site today. Obviously looks much more different. I mean, it's a nice piece, but again, I think he's kind of lost some of the charm that he had in the earlier years. I mean, I put this piece in here, which was the landing pier at Woodbridge, and I thought that was, again, him exploring something a little bit different, but still Morley never really recapturing some of those the strengths of his early years. Okay, we've got another couple of landscapes now. Lamorna Birch here, the lifeboat slip at St Ives in Cornwall. A great St Ives painter here. I think with Lamorna, you need to see the painting itself, because you can really feel the brush strokes. You can sort of feel the texture across here, and we'll see it in a later painting. But again, what he's doing is creating these beautiful scenes, but building up interest through texture. We've got this other piece here from him here, Prelude Today at Lamorna Cove. And you can see that I think it's a nice scene in its own right. But then again, you can see some of the kind of texture that he's building up in the waves. Now, I couldn't find that painting, but I found a similar one from this time period. And again, you can see the effect of his painting technique. I got to say that these two are actually, I think, better finished, and there's more depth to it than this one. But you can see what I was meaning in terms of the texture and the brush strokes. Kind of post-impressionist, really. He's not putting down color like Manet does. It's much more rougher. This feels to me more like a Bloomsbury-esque painting, but with the use of texture as a fulcrum to create something else new. Right, we saw Charles Gear earlier in the stream, and this was I thought a really lovely self-portrait of him. And again, Charles normally does landscape painting, so it was kind of fun to see him do a bit of portraiture. Again, I think this is a very fine painting. That got him in a little cravat thing, like a smoking jacket at the same time, but there's a great determination in his face, and I love the rendering on this as well. There's all, like, you can see he's kind of built up very thin layers, and there's some glazing going on at the same time, where it makes it almost feel a bit like a tempera painting rather than an oil. So yeah, really nice. It's a shame I think Charles didn't do more portraiture work, really. Okay, we've got this George Henry piece. Again, sorry, I've got to show the original one that was included, and I've managed to find something similar to that. So this is a Kingly Vale. It's essentially, I would say, like post-impressionist plus some of this kind of like interwar interest with some of the figures. He often does these kind of like figures in a scene, quite low down. You can see something similar to that here with this piece, where again they got the figures kind of going off into the distance. I think some really lovely colouring actually in some of his work. So imagine some of that across here. Again, just the right amount of rendering, I think, for me. He never takes it. He doesn't make it too sloppy ever, I think. So yeah, really nice piece here from George. Same about not being able to get the colours. Apologies for the photo here, guys. Like he didn't quite get the everything in focus. But this is another Bertram Priestman. Bertram, again, is very okay. What's interesting about all of the landscape guys here is they're not trying to copy someone else. So, for example, think about Victorian landscapes. They're still thinking about Constable through the entire period, or Turner. So they're sort of trapped in that dialectic, I think, for about 100 years. But I think what's interesting about landscape in this period, that they're kind of pulling on a variety of sources, but they've got a freedom at the same time. Now, Priestman painted in Holland several times. I've seen several of his kind of cow paintings, and he loves to include animals as part of it as well. So again, there's that kind of interesting novelty. I mean, I quite like this scene across here, capturing the lowlands. You can see these kind of like wild cattle roaming across. Maybe that's the kind of cattle master or shepherd or whatever it is across, sitting down by the tree, and there are boats kind of sailing off in the distance. There is a calmness and a coolness that is captured during this as well. So really nice piece here. Okay, we haven't had something from Harold Knight for a little while. Again, our Vermeer rip-off artist. I'm being a bit too harsh there. I think that Harold sort of goes beyond some of this kind of Vermeer aesthetic but by this point. And I mean, you could take it as like a portrait. You could take this as a bit of Vermeer-esque realism, but I think he's creating something a little bit different here as well. His pieces often focus about women in rooms. There is an intimacy that is all about the object, and the object in this case is the old book here. She's kind of looking down, looking through the pages, and I think it's really captured an ability of expression here. She's not kind of got her head in the book. She's just sneakily looking down, maybe capturing a moment, maybe just reading through the pages to pass some time. The lighting and the shading for this work is phenomenal. I mean, just on the figure itself, but then the use of values, I think, is really brilliant, and again shows that Knight, he continued to kind of develop his work and was able to kind of move things forward even in the later stages of his life. And I think it's a really beautiful rendering here. Okay, we've got a Frank Short, another mezzotint here, gathering the flock on Maxwell Bank. I mean, this is very much as what we know him for. I've got a better photo. I've managed to go to an American, I think it was like Portland Museum has a version of this, and I think it looks a lot better in real life. And I think what's lovely about his mezzotints, they've got this lovely kind of quasi sepia color to it. Again, Frank does best when he has these kind of stormy pieces. It's about the land versus the sea. It's about nature versus other nature. It's they're always very confrontational, very strong and powerful, and just a nice piece. Again, I think he doesn't really move beyond what he's been doing for the last couple of years. But again, that's okay. I think he's got a lot to talk about in that space still. Speaking of the knights, Laura continues to show her range and strength. Again, I am a big fan of Harold, and I think they are more equal than people consider them to be today. But I will say that Laura has great range and depth, and that's something that Harold has never shown in the same kind of way. This piece is called Harvest. It is a landscape, but it's also this little element of realism here. And what we can see here is beautiful England with the fields being harvested. You can see all the kind of the hay baled. I guess this is done by scythes and hand, because you can see rather than you've got all of the balers, you've got these little tiny bundles here in these wheat fields. And we've got this moment of repose here. The light is shining. The fields have been brought in. And we've got 3 figures here and 3 figures here to balance. Both the animals and humans are at rest. And we were just in this moment of happiness and life, and just part of the kind of countryside and the beauty of that. Just in terms of rendering, this piece is brilliant. And I think actually Laura's landscapes are actually phenomenal. And this is, again, I think maybe one of my favorite landscapes that we've seen so far. The colouring for it, however, is even better. Again, apologies for the 5 pixels that we've got in this imagery. Just so beautiful. There's something interesting going on as well that you can start to see a little bit, where this piece is about conflict as well. You can see the a couple of smokestacks arriving in the distance, the steam trains, both simultaneously. Steam trains to us are romantic, but you've got to remember, to Ruskin, they are the enemy. They are the sign of danger and industrialization and technical. And I think Laura's maybe hinting on the Ruskinian nature across here, that this way of life has a horrible end to it, in the sense that it's going to be totally and utterly demolished by industrialization. Now, I would say that having lived through the industrialization of agriculture, it hasn't been as bad as I think certain other areas, certainly compared to craft and industry as a whole. Industrialization has hit those areas much harder than agriculture. But there's definitely, just thinking philosophically, the one big consequence that no one talks about is that, yes, farmers are able to achieve a lot more with the modern machinery, and again, food production has gone up, and I think that's wonderful. But the community doesn't come together during the time of harvest in the same kind of way. The animals that were bred and created for those moments have been basically forgotten about, or have sort of lost their purpose, in the sense that they were bred for a purpose, and now that purpose doesn't exist anymore. So what we're witnessing really is that this way of life has in some ways been totally and utterly demolished. And you can find scenes like this, but it'll be a farming family, or a farmer who's brought in loads of outside workers, for example, who are willing to work for nothing. So I think Laura has captured this really beautiful moment, but it's got a sharp edge to it as well. And I think she's got such a strong wit that I really appreciate it. But absolutely love this piece here. Okay, we've got another portrait by George Harcourt here. Again, I think he's really holding the banner of the great portrait from someone like Spencer Watson and Strang of his pieces aren't flattering, but they hold nobility. It's about strength of character, about a different kind of beauty. And you've got this kind of middle-aged woman here, Villiers Beneg. And like I said, she's not strikingly beautiful like we saw with that earlier kind of like Hollywood starlet figure, but he's emphasizing the cheekbones. He's giving her this kind of strong, scowling face. And I think she's a real character and a really interesting person. Her pose is also kind of interesting. She's sort of leaning forward with her hands aside. So there's that openness, but also a kind of an attentiveness and an intensity to her. She's also looking off into the distance as well. She looks like she's sitting on a chaise or something like that. And George has chosen not to kind of show a lot of the background rendering. But I really like this piece. I think George's done really nicely here. Okay, we've now got a Lavery painting the Viscount Wimborne. And the reason why I've got a colour picture of this is that this was actually recently sold at Christie's, and I think it went for $500,000, something like that. I think it's a great painting, but it's just interesting that, like, the thing is that Lavery is like one of Ireland's greatest painters, really. Do I think this painting deserves £500,000 for it? I think, especially compared to some of the stuff we've seen, which should be valued way below that, I think the answer is no. But this is definitely one of Lavery's best, if I'm honest with you. Lavery, the Irish kind of Scots-Irish portraitist, sort of sits in the Sargent tradition, really. This kind of like impressionistic, flowy paintings. Again, look at the format here. But he does update stuff, but he also adds like a bit of a cheekiness to it, and I think we've captured that really lovely pose here from Wimborne here, and she's kind of looking behind us, and there's an anxiousness and an anxiety to her at the same time, one leg brought over the other, looking over her shoulder, literally clutching her pearls. So Lavery's managed to capture this brilliant moment and a little bit about her personality. And this is definitely one of his best rendered pieces as well. So I think maybe it's worth the price alone, being one of Varley's greatest paintings at the same time. We've got this little sketch from Julius Olson that I put in here, which was kind of interesting, called The Deep Sea Fantasy. Again, nothing really to talk home about, but just the interest that Olson experimenting a little bit with kind of like almost like this like mythic fantasy painting, these little mermaids dotting around. A bit of an amuse-bouche. Thinks would look quite nice as a small little painting, but also like Olson is like one of the painters with the least range that we've seen. Does a lot of good stuff, but it's basically the same concept time and time again. So that was kind of interesting just to throw it in here. Speaking of lacking of range, we've got another Brockhurst here again, and I mean it's a lovely painting, but very much what he does. This is called By the Hills, and you can see the hills in the background. He does these like lovely portraits of women focused on these kind of jewel tones, strong chiaroscuro lights and shades, very monotonous color tones here, focused in around blues. In this case, he kind of flits between blues and purples. Still a lovely painting, really well rendered. Does it again? Should painters do something new every single time? I think it's a really good question, and I think some painters, their strength is in their repetition, and I think Brockhurst found a groove to run in and went with it, and has produced many good paintings, as opposed to an experimenter that's flitting all over the place and never actually achieving anything, or never creating a single great painting. He also did this piece called Mrs. Paul Mellon. I thought this was a little bit more interesting. I was really annoyed not to get a colour version of this, because again, I really felt like the rendering quality was a little bit different here. I have to say, there is something a bit grotesque about some of Brockhurst's work. He definitely brings out, like, part of the problem with his realism is it gives everything this kind of fake quality to it, and I feel like there was a real naturalism to this Mellon painting. Interestingly, he did an etching of her afterwards, and I think that was also an excellent piece of work. And again, being fair to Brockhurst, probably one of the greatest etchers of the 20th century in terms of skill levels and kind of quality of work as well. So you got to give him his respect. This is a slightly out of focus Clausen painting. I think it's called The View from My Window. Clausen has several stages, really. He's got his Victorian. He's quite old by this period, and he was doing works from like the 1880s even. So he's like, again, I loved hearing an artist like this that just keeps on churning out work. He starts off with his like post-French realist period / a little bit like what if the Ford Madox Ford work painting. It's a little bit like that, but with an agricultural theme. Then he goes through his kind of post-impressionist, maybe a bit of Pouvry in there. Like if Pouvry de Chevenez did a landscape, what it would be like. And towards the end of his life, he does a lot of these kind of like house landscapes. I mean, maybe you'd even call them kind of like a return to realism here. And this is a number of workers working on a chimney or on a roof. But what he's managed to do is to transport this kind of realist genre into something new, into something different at the same time, by adding in this kind of beautiful tree here, the focus on the sky. And he's really a colorist. You got to see his colors and his rendering with the work, because it's totally beautiful and to die for, in my opinion. Okay, we've got this piece from Maurice Codner. I think we've not had him before in the mix, but this is the Colonel O'Pierce Circled. I think I just included it because, yes, it is very much like the establishment academic portraitists of the time, but there's some real pizzazz with the sitter that I thought was definitely worth including. And I love seeing old boys like this. Maybe he's getting ready for World War II. You put Monty in the same camp as him, but he's been around the block. There is this is our equivalent to kind of the Roman senator statues. Nobility, strength, confidence at the same time, but an informality as well. He is a powerful man, but he's one that he's not all about going exactly by the rule book. Is how I felt about him. I also like the actual rendering because it looks like he's sort of sitting on the cliffs of Dover itself, like he's a gigantized figure. I don't know if that's intentional or not, or maybe it's just a part of a bank, but it gives him this kind of bigger feeling to it. And I thought a really nice painting. Okay, so we're going to round out with Fleetwood Walker, and I mean, I'm still kind of hit or miss on Fleetwood Walker, if I'm honest with you. I love his nudes, but I think, again, he never really escapes the kind of greatness of it. Has a definite style, sort of sits in that kind of Deglane impressionistic-y camp. Still pleasant. And we're going to finish off. I think we've got 2 more pieces to go. This is an Algernon Newton piece, The River Stour. Interesting, because I've been tracking some of these guys on various auction houses. Algernon was like one of the most highly commanded artists in terms of his price. I think some of his work goes between like 50 and 100,000, and you can sort of see why. I think, again, he is a very unique artist. His landscapes are very, very powerful. Are they better than the Clausen? I would say no, in my opinion. But I think he definitely captures the time and a moment at the same time. And I think the colors in this are lovely. The rendering is beautiful. I haven't actually ever seen one of his paintings up close, so I think that maybe that's got to be on my to-do list as we come into the new year. Maybe I'll see if I can pop down and see something, because the rendering on it is really beautiful. And we've got this last one to finish off, which is just a little bit of an amuse-bouche to finish. Freddie's First Visit by Tucker here. And, well, what can we see? Well, it's a kind of a genre realist scene. A poor, hapless boyfriend has been taken to meet the parents, and there's just so many funny, like, okay, is this a great painting in terms of its rendering or its kind of quality? No. Is this one of the funniest paintings you'll see all week? Yes. And we've got Freddie here being dragged along by his beautiful girlfriend here, and she's dressed so delightfully. But what do we see on the left-hand side? We see a curious cat poking his nose round to see who this is. We've got a bulldog thundering through the house, about to assault him. The devious face on the brother across here, he just looks like an absolute little shit, doesn't he? I just love that. And then the noble father, the grand patrician, smoking a pipe, and the mother sitting down at the table. The sort of they are the lions in the den waiting. You know, all the energetic, youthful is kind of coming to him, but they sort of sit and wait. And you can see his expression across here, I think, is rather appropriate. But that's basically it for today. So I think we'll call it a close. And yeah, I'll speak to you guys next time then.